Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Security Space podcast. Today, we are joined by Seb Hyde, and what we will be discussing is actually part two of the four-part series all about the struggles of selling cybersecurity. But before we get into it, just a little bit of a background to where this all came from. So, myself and Seb both work in cybersecurity sales, and even the most promising of deals can actually stall without some good objection handling skills and, a structured POC execution. So what we will be delving into over the next half an hour, or what we will be learning from Seb over the next half an hour, is how to overcome both of those and make sure that we have a structured deal cycle or life cycle ahead of us. But before we get into it, Seb, are you okay just to give the audience a little bit of an introduction to yourself, if that's okay, mate?
Yeah, sure. Should I start from the start? How far do you want me to go back?
Well, what are you doing today, Seb?
Okay.
Maybe let's go back. Maybe not
I
so.
won't go from birth. Don't worry, I won't go that far back. So, at the moment, I am a regional sales manager at Netskope. We're a cloud security vendor based over in Silicon Valley. And I have been with the company for 3.5 years. Before that, I was with Palo Alto Networks. Before that, another vendor, Varonis. So, a decade really in cybersecurity sales. But I think, like most, when I left school, I didn't have my eye on cybersecurity sales. I probably didn't realize that it existed back then, right? But I was always quite technical, and it was funny because I was having this conversation with my cousin the other day because he was one of the people that inspired me to go into a career that was a little bit more technical. He's now a VP at Barclays, and he introduced me to gaming when I was a teenager, and it kind of went from there really. Because I am a bit of a geek. I don't know about you, Nick, but
Absolutely.
deep down, I am a little bit of a geek. Like I love my gaming. I love anything technical. My fiance will agree that I like anything kind of technical. So it was a nice transition. I could get the human interaction stuff with sales, but then also kind of keep that fire in me for the technical side of things. So yeah, I sell to 8,000 user plus accounts at the moment, what we consider strategic enterprise. So the nature of what Netscope does, we're talking complex sales cycles, 18 months, 2 years, even longer sometimes, just down to the amount of individuals that we influence within an organization. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation, buddy.
Nice. And that's what you've literally just piqued my interest a little bit on there. I suppose one of the first questions I want to throw into you is when you're dealing with such large enterprises and such long deal life cycles, um, how do you sort of manage when people move on, promotions, leaving company? There's a lot of it's like you're playing football, and as much as football's already a difficult sport, you've got to beat sort of 11 men or women, and but now you've got it where the goalposts are moving as well, and 1 minute you might
Mm.
shoot, and then the goalposts just move completely over here because that person has moved. How do you sort of change? How do you sort of approach a change in point of contact and influences through a deal lifecycle?
It literally happens in almost every major project. And like I said, just down to the nature of what Netscope provide as an organization, it touches everyone in the organization, from users through to the network team, through to the security, legal, governance, risk, compliance. So you're constantly dealing with changes in org structure. And I think it's important how you run a POC process, how you run the initial discovery is super important, and who you're relaying that discovery back to and validating that discovery with. And then how you're building champions is so important because you can't be single threaded when you're selling a solution like Netscope.
Hmm.
So that is super important. And then having structure in a proof of concept whereby you're involving as many of the right people as you can. You're working out who's going to influence the deal internally, who the economic buyer is. There might be multiple economic buyers because there often is. We're often seeing budget from multiple different teams to sell what we sell. So it is a challenge. Structure ultimately, Nick, is the way that you overcome it. It's validating you're driving the right outcomes for that organization and structuring it in a way that communicates that in the best light.
Nice, nice. And I suppose I just want to take it one step back, and then I'll circle back round. So, what is it that Netscope actually do then? What are you actually selling, Seb?
So we're called a SASE vendor or an SSE vendor, but we were founded 12 years ago, and ultimately the challenge was more and more organizations are moving to cloud. But legacy hardware-based security wasn't fit to secure that modern way of working. So our founders were working at Juniper Networks, and they decided that they wanted to try and solve this problem, right? Securing the modern way of working. And since then, as we know, we're both working from home today, I think. Um, and as a user, you're wherever you need to be. You might be in a cafe, you might be in your office, you might be at home. So your data and the applications and services that you're accessing aren't within the four walls of your office anymore. That, like I said, they're wherever they need to be. So you've got billions of different websites that we access. You've got, tens of thousands of different SaaS applications that an enterprise uses on a day-to-day basis. Um, so Netskope ultimately solves that problem. So we provide secure, fast, and reliable access for users like you and me to the applications and services that we need to be productive. Top line, that's what Netskope provides. There's lots of sub conversations we can get into around DLP and secure web and
Yeah.
SaaS usage, but ultimately, Nick, that is what we do.
So do check my understanding and don't be afraid to call me out if I am wrong on this. So I'm just going to obviously bring in a Wiz example as well. And part of Wiz's success, they've obviously got many contributors, but one of it is solving a business risk and it's making it easy to founders and CEOs of putting cloud security all in one unified platform. It sounds like Netscope follow the same ethos in the sense of making you simplifying sort of network security. Like you say, the world has got bigger since COVID. I know that remote work obviously has always been around, but my God, did COVID sort of accelerate it by a decade, I would say. And it sounds like Netscope are kind of solving that solution of all these different endpoints, different sort of uh, ways in which we can join the work network into one unified platform. Firstly, have I got that correct, or am I slightly off the rails there?
Yeah, and we're in similarly to Wiz, who are providing a consolidated platformization style story.
Yep,
That's been our approach for users and data.
got you.
So, like I said, that securing access for users to whatever they need to be productive, but wrapping in that DLP, threat prevention, all of that, CASB capability. And
Yep,
it means that we can consolidate what organizations were typically leveraging hardware-based security for
yep,
into a cloud-delivered platform, which we
yep.
manage. We own our own infrastructure, which is incredible. It's one of the key reasons why I joined Netskope. And that's how we deliver it, using our own infrastructure, which is our own private cloud. So it's different we integrate strongly with Wiz. The platformization cloud security story is similar, but we kind of target different market segments, is probably the best way of summarizing it.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. It wasn't that you were direct competitors, more so the ethos, but that's and the problems that you solve, which leads nicely to where I wanted to take this in the sense of like, so what are some of the common objections that you come up against on a day-to-day basis, and Seb?
The expensive card comes up a lot. And I think it's a challenge for a lot of vendors in our space. And it's usually that's a surface level objection, isn't it, really? Um, and it usually means either you've not been clear enough with how you can drive ROI, or there's a bit of a fear against change, the cost and risk of change. But yeah, if we've ran a process which is structured enough and we've proven the value well enough, you don't get that expensive, you know, objection typically. Um, I've kind of touched on another one there in the risk of change because it's more organizations are becoming used to this idea of SASE and SSE, which is the segment of security that we fit in, but there is still some that lean more towards traditional networking. So we're challenging a lot of legacy viewpoints in what we deliver because we're essentially saying a lot of your hardware firewalling we can deliver in our cloud.
Yeah.
A lot of the traditional networking that you're used to consuming on premise, we can deliver in our cloud.
Yep.
So, we get a lot of, especially network teams, who push back on the concept But
Yeah.
again, Netscope is all about driving outcomes for our customers. It's what we relentlessly focus on. So as long as we've done a good job and had enough time to explain the benefits, we typically put ourselves in a good position. I'd say those are the biggest, that risk of change piece,
Yeah.
and then the cost justification piece. I'm not going to say, yeah, just proving the cost is acceptable kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose to further echo your point of the legacy sort of tech stack of networking, because that's kind of where cyber was born, wasn't it? A little bit. So it's kind of like you've got to kind of win the hearts and minds of those that dare I say archaic view, because I don't mean that in a condescending way, but it's just like a lot of people are scared to f basically not fix what's not broken. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But it's like yes, you can kind of get away with it, but we're entering this new age now, and I try to avoid saying AI on every podcast, but it always seems to creep its way in. But attacks are getting more sophisticated, and if you don't change with the time, you are on borrowed time
Yeah.
before a breach actually happens. So yes, networking is good, but it's kind of like taking them on that journey and say like, look, it was good 5 years ago, but even 3 years ago in security, it sometimes is not. You're out of date. It's an
100%.
evolving landscape that is constantly having emerging technologies, new threats on a daily basis, and that's what's exciting about the industry as well. And I suppose that links very nicely to your first point around the expensive card. And there is so many techs, there's so many vendors now. There's so much money coming out of Silicon Valley and so much investors kind of pumping money into these startups that are coming out of Israel, out of the US. France have got a good ecosystem going on. I think the UK is slowing down a bit, Seb, so I think we're a little bit out of the party at the moment. There is obviously still some fantastic vendors here in the UK as well. But I think to kind of tie this point up is maybe the products are getting a little bit saturated because of there's so much out there, and therefore buyers are going, oh, they're just getting pounded with sort of like this costs this much, this costs that much, and therefore how are you different to the other competition, the other DLP provider, the other identity provider? Do you agree that there's a sort of a lot of competition out there, and that's sort of
There's
maybe inflating the
it's
market?
it's so noisy out there.
Yeah,
And I do genuinely feel for customers because whatever it is they're buying, whether it's an endpoint or EDR solution, whether it's email security, whether it's SASE, there's a long list of vendors, and partners do a fantastic job
yeah,
of cutting through the noise a little bit for customers. But it's chaotic, and I think it puts even more emphasis on us as salespeople and the SEs that we work with to be structured in the way that we sell to sell based on outcomes. We're not a kind of out and out playbook company like your Wiz and your Zscalers of the world, but we align to the playbook methodology. But what we focus on is, and it comes all the way from our CEO, right? We drive outcomes for our customers, and if you can communicate using stories, perhaps in the early stages of discovery with a new customer, what outcomes have other customers driven?
yeah,
What metrics can we align to those? Have they saved X cost over X period? Have they managed to consolidate 5, 6 different tools into one? As long as we can structure how we sell, we help customers cut through the noise of all of the vendors in the market, right? And it's almost nice. I'm competitive just innately in everything I do in life. So I'm fine with there being competition in our market. I think it's great. I think it keeps us on our toes. It allows us to, we leave no stone unturned because we have to run great sales processes because there's competition meeting with the customer as well. So as long as we can be that vendor that is structured, drives outcomes, aligns metrics that the champion can communicate to the economic buyer and to the board, as long as we're doing that in the best possible way, we can, yeah, like I said a few times, help them cut through that noise.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree entirely, mate. It's a noisy old market out there.
And that's exactly why there needs to be the right way of doing it, isn't there? And that segues perfectly to what want to ask you about sales tactics that may or may not have expired. And I feel I've already framed you in the wrong way here, in the sense of ambulance chasers and fear-mongering sellers.
Yeah, okay.
What's your
Oof,
thoughts on
I
that, Seb?
like to think that we don't see very much of it anymore. um, but you occasionally do.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it can be culture within an organization. I'm so blessed to work for an organization that, we're a big organization now, but we feel like a startup. We're very collaborative with how we operate. Like I have a great relationship with my boss. Leadership don't they put the right amount of pressure on, but it's not an unhealthy culture in that sense. And I'm
Yeah.
super lucky. I've heard some horror stories of other vendors, and maybe that culture is what drives that kind of behavior. I'm not too sure.
Mm.
But personally, we should be looked at by our customers as consultative in the way that we operate and trusted advisors. If I'm not trusted advisor to my customer, one of our C-level execs might be, one of our technical team might be, one of our architects might be. So that if you've got that level of a relationship and your messaging is right, you shouldn't have to ambulance chase.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really. I mean, yeah, it makes me laugh on LinkedIn though when I see it, I must admit.
Yeah, there is some horror stories, isn't there? Um, so I just want to link back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about how it was about the obviously the expensive card and the I'm just not ready to change card. Yeah, naturally. There's been many sort of discussions that I've had myself where initially on the discovery call it'd be like, "Oh yeah, I like your products, but we're just not ready," and that's absolutely fine. That is absolutely fine. Timing's right. You can't get blood out of a stone. You can definitely sort of educate people on a journey, but timing is sort of it plays a major part. They just might not be ready. But the ones where you just come off that call where you're like, I think you are ready, but maybe I just didn't position that the right way. Obviously, if you've done your job well enough and you built the rapport, and it is a consultative relationship and not just a crash bang wallop call, and you move on to the next, then you should naturally get a second bite of the cherry, and you have another chat, and you go a little bit deeper. What would your advice be when you're like, okay, I do think this company need our product. They don't think they have, but I've got to take them on this journey. How do you go about doing that? How do you sort of map out that journey for them, Seb?
Yeah, so we should be confident in our own value proposition, and we should also understand how that value proposition breaks down into the individual departments that we sell to. And I'm talking from Netskope's perspective, we have a message and stories and metrics that will apply to a network or an infrastructure person. Same with a security person, like I said, compliance, etc. So either if you've had a call and you felt the company needs our solution down to the research that I've done prior to the call, and other customers in their industry are buying our product and they've driven these outcomes, but that person it just didn't feel like it resonated well enough with, I would pivot to another person, whether that's a different department, whether that's someone a little bit more senior, whether it's someone a little bit more junior, just to build the story. Because regardless of who you're speaking to, there's someone above and below and left and right of that individual that will be relevant in some way.
Mm.
If you're speaking to the exec, or the person that you believe is the economic buyer, it might be the operational individuals who are having the problems. That they're going through a raft of alerts constantly. They don't have visibility of SaaS usage. They can't control or see what users are doing with AI. That might be a more operational person's problem rather than the economic buyer themselves. Like I religiously listen to the Revenue Builders podcast. I don't know whether you do, with John Kaplan and John McMahon. And John
No,
Kaplan
that's a good
always
chance.
mentions, oh, so good.
Yeah.
If you like Medic and you like your playbook stuff, and amazing, I listen to them all the time. They essentially get VPs of sales and execs within sales. In fact, broadly across software
Yeah.
sales. And one of the things John Kaplan always mentions is M's and W's. So an M would be you start with the operational person, you build the kind of business case, you do your discovery, and then you go up to the economic buyer and you validate that point with them. And then you might go back down to the operational people in a POC or a workshop, back up to the economic buyer. So you might, and then the W is you start with the economic buyer, they tell you that they're having these problems and challenges, and you go down to the operational people to prove out the solution works. And M and W, I love that. Absolutely loved it when I first heard it.
Mm.
So there's different ways, if you look at those two approaches, the M and the W, you've got an opportunity to speak to someone operational and build a case and take it up to the economic buyer, or you've got the opportunity to speak to the economic buyer and take it down to the operational people to prove out the technical solution works.
Yeah.
So if you're speaking to someone and it's not quite landing how you perhaps expected, then pivot to either higher or lower and build the story out. I remember at my previous role at Palo Alto Networks, I had my target account list, and I remember speaking to one of the more senior reps there, and he said, when you're working through your accounts, you want to get 3, 4, 5 no's before you move on, because you've got 3, 4, 5 plus different people to sell the message to in that account. You don't want to give up and move on until you've had everyone relevant say absolutely no way.
Yeah.
So there's always an opportunity to pivot every time. And if you understand your value proposition and can map it to, how those departments are going to get value, there's always someone to speak to. But on the other side of that, sorry to go on a little bit on this one, but it's a great question. There is also a time where you have to qualify out and move on, because we've only got 7 days in the week, all of us. So we have to manage our own expectations and be careful with our own time and be able to qualify out and move on. So dependent on what you're selling, I think it's always a non-negotiable really to understand what those key, if you heard those key things, at that point you move on. We've just bought a new vendor, we've just bought one of your competitors on a 5-year term. That might be one that you just nurture in the background and don't put loads of time into because you've got 5 years, right? Or it might be that they were, just bought by a US-based company and all of the decisions are going to be made out of the US, and it's likely that they adopt the technology that organization uses. So it's about understanding those and being honest with yourself. And if you hear those things, being comfortable enough to qualify out and move on somewhere that's going to be a better use of your time.
Yeah. A lot of great points there, Seb. I really sort of like a few points there, like definitely the M and the W, and I
Love
suppose
that. I absolutely love that.
would you say that is obviously key for? I was trying to think about it. Was it key for sort of like enterprises? Would you do that in SMEs? Would you just be like, probably just it needs to be sort of like you say 8,000 users above? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's always going to be an economic buyer.
Yep.
And in an SME, in a small organization, in a commercial account that we would call them, that economic buyer might be the FD.
Mm.
So there's no way he's going to be running the technical evaluation of the product. So there's always an opportunity for an M and a W.
Yeah.
Maybe in commercials, it might be more M's than W's because you might be starting with the operational challenges and taking that up the business. And it's also a great opportunity to challenge your champion. Because if you're starting with an operational person and you're building them out as a champion, we know the rules of a champion. Are they selling behind our back? Are they introducing us to power? So it's a way of saying, okay, the FD is the economic buyer. Can you sponsor us in a conversation with him or her?
Yeah.
But honestly, I think that rule is relevant. It's also a really good way of keeping yourself honest with your forecast.
Yep.
Because if a deal has followed that M or W path and you validated with the economic buyer, you can be quite honest with yourself on how forecastable that deal is.
Yeah. How I always have like a question lined up, but then you say something and it just pricks my ears. I'm like, I want to ask you that. Your forecast, how do
Oh
you
God,
how
I'm joking.
like what have you got on there? What's your five? How do you how brutal are you? How do you what are some of the home truths that you follow when you're looking at your forecast and going on paper, yes, but my gut is saying this. What are some rules that you set for yourself, Seb?
So this is where the playbook becomes really useful. Like I said, we're not an out and out, playbook company. Um, we don't, we're not kind of robotic in the way that we implement it in a sales process because, like I said, it's all about driving outcomes for our customers. So if we know we're doing that well enough, then that's great. And I really like the way that we implement the playbook, by the way. But the playbook's great for keeping yourself honest with forecasting because that's the science side of sales. If you know you've completed, all of those pieces of information from metrics all the way through to competition, you know that you're in a good place to forecast a deal. And it's about keeping yourself honest, I think, is the main thing. One thing that I use religiously is a reverse close plan or a reverse go live plan because when you're forecasting, it's great to understand all of those moving parts that will lead to the go live date for the customer.
Yeah.
And that's also a really collaborative exercise because you can guide a customer through a go live plan
Yeah.
and it means there's no surprises and
It
present
makes
that to
it
leadership.
real, doesn't it? It makes it real in their eyes. Like, oh, okay, Christ,
I
my
forgot about 8 or 9 out of those to 10 of those things. Yeah.
yeah,
And there's also there's an education piece as well because we we forget that we sell our solution a lot and the customer doesn't buy our solution a lot. The customer doesn't buy our solution as much as we sell it. If that makes sense. So we're guiding them through the process too. We know all the moving parts. We've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. And this isn't a case of trying to get a deal done, within a month. It's about driving the customer to their desired outcome. They have a renewal. We want to make sure we're in there implementing the solution way ahead of that renewal to drive the best possible deployment and outcome for that customer. So all of these things just kind of reinforce the goal of making their deployment successful and driving the right outcomes for their business, proving ROI, and then becoming a long-standing customer of ours.
nice.
Maybe I went off on a wild tangent then. I can't remember what the initial
No,
question
that
was.
I really enjoyed that segment. Really enjoyed that segment. So what are some common pitfalls that you see in sort of POC management that can actually kill a deal where you're like, oh, okay, you've not been consultative there, you've rushed it, you've not listened to the customer. What is it that you've seen in terms of like things to avoid?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting because obviously, in comparison to some people, I've not been doing this for ages, but over 10 years now, which has been great. And you have some scars from along your way. And, I worked for a small partner in London when I first started in the industry. And, we had our processes, but we were selling lots of different products. And then coming to, a vendor like Veronis, who were just all over the POC process was slick as anything. And I think it is today, maybe even more so with some of the great leadership they've been hiring over there. But you learn from experience things to do and not do. And I think some of my key takeaways over my career has always been, you know, define metrics up front with the customer, define a success criteria. I know it's so overused, that term, and that can be a POC test plan to the customer. Um, but it's a mutually agreed um, document that you collaborate on, and you say, if we can achieve all of these use cases that drive all of these outcomes, will you deem this a successful proof of concept?
Hmm.
It's having that commitment up front and not going into a POC blindly
Yeah.
that will put you in the best position for success. So that's a big one. So like structure, define success criteria, define metrics up front, and then that allows you to prove those out during a POC. And it also means that you can keep the POC under control, if that makes sense. We don't want to do a 3, 4, 5 month POC. We want to keep it within time parameters to give ourselves the best chance of success. And it's those kind of documents, Nick, where the most successful projects I've been part of is where the customer, we've built that success criteria with them, and they've gone, this is amazing. I'm going to present this in our, you know, uh, budget approval meeting, and they're going through it with their leadership team. So it's that kind of collaboration that means you're successful. Um, yeah, I think that is the biggest takeaway from a POC perspective. It's having all of that agreement up front. It's bringing in the right people.
Mm.
I've always been, I think it's because I've been so lucky to work for great companies, and Netskope is the best I've worked for in the case of the resource that we have available is just phenomenal.
Mm.
And everyone is so open to collaborating with you. I've had my colleagues in the US, some of our C-level colleagues in the US join calls at 3, 4 a.m. their time
Yeah.
to present to a customer. And I think it's having, I mean, what's the word? It's almost like it's leaving your ego at the door almost.
Yeah.
Like as salespeople, doesn't just have to be me and my SE. Like
Yeah.
we have some incredible leadership that will join a call at 3 or 4 a.m. their time. Like use them. But then again, that is a culture thing. But yeah, those are my key points, I think, for a successful POC.
Yeah, fantastic. I will be watching this back myself and making a lot of notes because, like I say, I'm much less experienced than you, Seb, and I'm learning so much on this as well. And I suppose it's really good just I just want to tie that point up in the sense of it sounds simple, doesn't it? We are just tapping into, and I mean that in the nicest way. I'm not trying to bloody patronize you in any way, but it's the
No, I
emotional
get it. Yeah,
intelligence to be able to like cool like when the SE is going into the granular level product parts of the product on the demo, it's like wow, this is like a really cool product and we're living in the matrix. It's like wow, like the technology blows me away. And but when you come back out of it, it's like, okay, cool, this is where our role is to come in, step up, okay. And it is like, okay, what do you need to see from us in order for this to be a successful outcome? And it's literally as simple as like and it's making it customizable to how that is relevant to them. So if for example, it's about leak credentials, it's like, cool, can you give us a test sample and we can essentially run our product on these data sets and come back with these credentials, prioritize them, and therefore relay back to you how this might have an impact on this business risk, whatever it might be.
yeah,
You go in from the technical granular level of a demo of what it might be a massive platform to exactly what their pain point is, and then how that impacts the wider business or their wider clients. And it is essentially tying everything up. And that's where we've just
100%.
got to position everything.
And it's about front loading that discovery and being curious. Like the best salespeople I've ever worked with are the most curious ones. Like
Yeah.
they genuinely want to understand their customers.
Yeah.
Because if you front load all of that curiosity and discovery to the start of your sales cycle, it means you understand what the organization wants to achieve, what the challenges are, what those pains are. You help them implicate pain. You truly understand what that pain is causing their organization, and that can be
Yep.
have a dollar sign on it if it needs to, or a time number. Um, and it's just, yeah, being innately curious because when you genuinely listen and understand your customers, it becomes quite straightforward to identify pain. You build trust and credibility, but you have to genuinely want to understand what they're doing. And that's one of the things I enjoy so much about the job is you get to meet and you get to meet with some awesome people
Yeah.
and organizations who are doing exciting things. And I've always just been genuinely curious about what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Um, because once you build that trust and credibility, back to the original question around the POC, then you build all of that into a success criteria and a mutual commitment, if you like.
Yep.
And then you know that if you manage to prove all of those things that you promised to the customer and drive those outcomes in the POC, you can ask the question, if we do all of that, what's going to hold us back from you being a customer of ours?
Yep.
Because you proved all of that out confidently. And then back to your original question around cost.
Yep.
If you've done all of that, you've proven an ROI that it's expensive and too risky. Objection is non-existent because you've proven the value it can bring and you've aligned it to metrics and you've done it properly. It's the go slow at the start to go fast in the process for sure.
What a fantastic way to end, Seb. It has been an absolutely terrific podcast. And like I said a few minutes ago, I'll be watching this back in my own time and definitely having my notepad out and going through it slowly and taking down all your tips. But yeah, that pretty much rounds up episode 2 of this 4-part series about selling in cybersecurity. If you want to watch episode 1 with Eyal, I'll be sure to put a link in down below. And I will also put in a link to Netskope so that you can see all the fantastic work that Seb and the team are doing over there. But Seb, once again, I just want to extend a thanks for coming on the Screw Space podcast, mate.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.